The alarm clock screamed at 5 in the morning. Sophie Mitchell's hand shot out from under the thin blanket, silencing it with a practiced slap. The darkness of her studio apartment in Queens pressed against the single window, where the glow of distant streetlights barely penetrated. She lay still for 3 heartbeats, willing herself into consciousness, then swung her legs over the side of the narrow bed. The floor was cold, always cold. Even in summer, this basement apartment held onto winter like a grudge. She moved through her morning routine with the efficiency of someone who had performed it 1,000 times. Bathroom, splash water on her face, avoid looking too long at the dark circles under her eyes. The mirror told truths she didn't have time to acknowledge. 24 years old and already feeling 40. That's what crushing debt and impossible choices did to a person. Her phone buzzed, a video call. Sophie propped it against the coffee maker and answered. "Morning, sweetheart." Catherine Mitchell's voice was warm, despite the hospital gown and the IV line snaking into her arm. At 56, she looked older. Cancer had a way of stealing years that makeup couldn't restore. "Hey, Mom, how are you feeling?" "Better today. The new medication is helping." A lie. Sophie could see it in the tightness around her mother's mouth. But they both needed the lie, so Sophie smiled and nodded. "That's wonderful. I'll visit this weekend, okay?" "Don't you dare spend money on a train ticket. I'm fine here. How's work?" Work. The word tasted bitter. Sophie glanced at the pile of envelopes on her counter. Red stamps, final notices. The student loan company had called 4 times yesterday. "It's good. I'm picking up extra shifts." Another lie between mother and daughter, a gift wrapped in protection. They talked for 3 more minutes. Small words about nothing important. Everything important lived in what they didn't say. When the call ended, Sophie stood in her quiet apartment and let herself feel it. The weight. The crushing, suffocating weight of $47,000 in student loans from a medical degree she'd never finish. $23,000 in medical bills that insurance pretended didn't exist. Rent 2 months overdue with a landlord who had stopped being understanding around Christmas. She touched the silver chain at her neck. A cheap thing, tarnished at the edges, holding a compass locket no bigger than a quarter. Inside was a faded photo of a man she barely remembered. Her father, James Mitchell, dead when she was 10. A car accident on the I-95, her mother had said. Quick, painless, final. Sophie had pressed her thumb against the compass so many times over the years that the engraving was wearing smooth. True North, that's what her father had written on the back. Keep your compass, Sophie girl. It'll always point you home. Right now, home felt like drowning. She dressed in her work uniform, black slacks that were starting to shine at the knees, white button-down with a small stain near the collar that bleach couldn't quite erase, black flats with soles worn thin enough to feel every crack in the sidewalk. She tied her hair back, checked her reflection one last time, and stepped into the November cold. The subway was crowded with people who looked as tired as she felt. Sophie found a spot near the door and watched Manhattan appear piece by piece through the scratched windows. Somewhere in that forest of glass and steel, people were waking up in penthouses, drinking coffee that cost more than her hourly wage, planning their days around leisure instead of survival. She used to be angry about that. Now she was just tired. The Obsidian occupied the ground floor of a building that probably cost more per square foot than most people earned in a year. Sophie had worked there for 6 months and still felt like an imposter every time she walked through the staff entrance. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers that threw rainbow light across white tablecloths, the kind of silence that only extreme wealth could purchase. The morning prep meeting was brief. Mr. Harrington, the floor manager, was a nervous man with thinning hair and a habit of wringing his hands when he spoke. "Table 7 tonight," he said, not quite looking at Sophie. "Marcus Kane." The kitchen staff went quiet. Everyone knew the name. Marcus Kane wasn't just wealthy. He wasn't just powerful. He was the kind of dangerous that made politicians sweat and journalists carefully choose their words. The Kane Syndicate controlled half the underground economy in New York. Legitimate businesses on the surface. Something much darker underneath. "He's dining with his fiancée," Mr. Harrington continued. His hands twisted. "Victoria Ashford, Senator's daughter. This is an important table. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make eye contact. Don't. He trailed off, searching for the right words to explain how to serve people who could destroy your life with a phone call. Just be invisible, he finally said. Sophie nodded. Invisible. She'd had plenty of practice. The afternoon passed in the usual rhythm, polishing silverware, folding napkins into swans, memorizing the wine list even though she'd never tasted anything on it. By 6 o'clock, when the first guests began arriving, Sophie had pushed her own problems into a locked box in the back of her mind. Survival meant focus. Focus meant tips. Tips meant maybe, possibly, keeping her mother's medication coming for another month. Table 7 was in the center of the room. Prime location. Maximum visibility. When Marcus Kane arrived at 7:30, the energy in the restaurant shifted like a barometric pressure drop before a storm. He was tall, 6'3", maybe more. The kind of height that made other men instinctively straighten their spines. His suit was charcoal gray, cut so perfectly that it looked like a second skin. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from stone. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, eyes the color of espresso that seemed to catalog everything they touched. He moved through the room like an apex predator who knew exactly where he stood in the food chain. Behind him came Victoria Ashford. She was beautiful in the way that magazine covers were beautiful. Platinum blonde hair that caught the light. A figure poured into a scarlet Versace gown. Diamonds at her throat that probably cost more than Sophie would earn in a lifetime. But her eyes were cold, the kind of cold that came from never having been told no. They sat. Marcus pulled out his phone immediately, typing something with the focused intensity of a man who controlled empires through text messages. Victoria ordered a martini, then another, then a third. Sophie watched from the corner, waiting for her cue. My father expects the port deal to go through by Friday. Victoria's voice carried across the quiet restaurant, sharp, demanding. If you don't sign the papers, he's going to hold up your construction permits in the meatpacking district. Marcus didn't look up from his phone. Tell the senator that if he threatens my permits again, I'll release the photos from his trip to the Cayman Islands. His voice was low, a baritone that somehow managed to be both smooth and dangerous, like velvet wrapped around razor wire. You're impossible. Victoria crossed her arms. You're lucky I'm marrying you. No one else would put up with your coldness. That's when Mr. Harrington caught Sophie's eye. A small gesture. Your turn. Sophie picked up the champagne bottle. Louis Roederer, $400. She approached the table with her eyes down, her breathing controlled. Champagne, sir? Madam? Victoria's head whipped around. Her eyes raked over Sophie like she was evaluating livestock, taking in the slightly worn uniform, the off-brand shoes, the exhaustion that probably showed despite Sophie's best efforts. Finally, the word came out like a slap. I've been empty for 5 minutes. Do they hire tortoises at this establishment? Sophie felt heat creep up her neck, but she kept her voice steady. I apologize for the delay, miss. She reached forward to pour. Her hand was steady. Years of practice had taught her how to serve without trembling, even when customers treated her like furniture. The bottle tilted. Golden liquid began to flow into Victoria's crystal flute. It happened in a fraction of a second. Victoria jerked her elbow back. Sharp, sudden. Whether it was deliberate or just the careless movement of someone who'd never had to think about consequences, Sophie would never know. The impact caught her wrist. The bottle slipped. Not much. Just enough. As champagne cascaded out in a golden arc. Not onto the table. Not onto the floor. Directly onto the scarlet Versace gown in Victoria's lap. The silence that followed was total. Absolute. The kind of silence that precedes disasters. Sophie froze, the bottle still in her hand. Oh God, I am so sorry. Let me get a towel. You idiot! Victoria's screams shattered the quiet like breaking glass. She shot to her feet. The chair scraped against marble with a sound that made everyone flinch. Do you have any idea what this is? This is custom silk, you stupid, clumsy little... The slap came before Sophie could process what was happening. Victoria's palm connected with Sophie's cheek with enough force to snap her head to the side. The crack echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot. Sophie stumbled backward, her hand flying to her face. The bottle slipped from her fingers. It hit the floor but didn't break, just rolled away in a lazy arc while 300 people watched in frozen horror. Sophie's cheek burned. Her eyes watered, but she bit down hard on the inside of her lip. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of these people. Miss Blair. Mr. Harrington appeared from nowhere, his face the color of old paper. I am so terribly sorry. We will pay for the dress. Of course, immediately. Anastasia, get to the kitchen. No, Victoria's voice cut through his stammering. She pointed a manicured finger at Sophie like she was identifying a criminal. I want her fired, now, and I want her blacklisted from every restaurant in this city, and then I want her arrested for assault. The word landed like a physical blow. Sophie's head snapped up. Assault? You hit me. You attacked me with a bottle. Victoria's voice rose to a shriek. Pure performance. Every eye in the restaurant was on her, and she knew exactly how to play to an audience. You deliberately ruined my dress. Dante, are you going to let this servant speak to your future wife like that? She turned to Marcus, who had remained seated through the entire exchange. His phone was face down on the table now. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. His expression was unreadable. Destroy her, Victoria commanded. The restaurant held its breath. Every fork was frozen in midair. Every conversation had died. 300 people waited to see what happened when you crossed the most dangerous man in New York. Marcus Kane slowly placed his napkin on the table. The movement was deliberate, precise. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with the kind of calm that preceded violence. At his full height, he towered over the table. Over Victoria. Over everyone. He turned, not toward Victoria, toward Sophie. Sophie looked down immediately. Every instinct screamed to make herself small, invisible, to disappear into the floor before this man decided what her punishment would be. She could feel him approaching, could sense the weight of his attention like a physical thing. Then warm fingers touched her chin, gentle, tilting her face up. Sophie's eyes flew open in shock. Marcus Kane was looking at her, not through her, not past her, at her. His dark eyes moved across her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. He studied the red handprint blooming on her pale cheek. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathered near his temple. His gaze dropped to her throat, to the cheap silver chain, to the tarnished compass locket that had slipped free from her collar during the assault. Something changed in his expression. A flash of recognition, of shock quickly buried. His eyes widened, just barely, then locked back onto her face, really seeing her this time. The curve of her nose, the shape of her eyes, the way she held herself despite being terrified. Sophie. He said her name like a confirmation. Not a question, a statement of fact. Yes, sir. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Marcus turned slowly to face Victoria. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus? Victoria's confidence faltered for the first time. What are you doing? Call security. Mr. Harrington. Marcus didn't look away from Victoria. His voice carried to every corner of the restaurant. Bring me the security footage from the camera above this table. Send it to my personal server immediately. Of course, Mr. Kane. And bring a bag of ice. Victoria smirked. She crossed her arms, triumph flooding back into her expression. Finally, make sure she packs her things, Marcus. Marcus took the ice pack from the manager's shaking hands. Then, with movements that seemed impossible from a man who supposedly had no softness in him, he turned back to Sophie and pressed it gently against her burning cheek. The entire restaurant gasped. Hold this, he murmured to Sophie. Then he faced Victoria. His expression was glacial, the kind of cold that burned. The ice wasn't for her, Victoria. Victoria blinked. Excuse me? You slapped my employee. Each word was precise, clinical. You caused a scene in my place of business, and you showed a lack of class that is, frankly, embarrassing. Your employee? Victoria laughed, but it was a nervous sound. Marcus, she ruined my dress. She's a nobody. She is a human being. The correction was quiet, deadly. And as for the dress, Marcus reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He wrote something quickly, tore out the check, and let it flutter to the floor at Victoria's feet. That is $10,000. Buy a new dress and buy a new fiancé while you're at it. We're done. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Victoria stared at him, her mouth open, closed, opened again. What? The engagement is over. Marcus's voice was bored now, dismissive. Get out. You can't be serious. Victoria's voice climbed toward hysteria. My father, the port deal, the election. Your father is a man who knows better than to bet against the house. Marcus stepped closer to her. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every ear in the restaurant. I tolerate many things in my world, Victoria. Greed, ambition, even ruthlessness. But I do not tolerate cruelty toward those who cannot fight back. It's a sign of weakness. He gestured to the door. Even before I have security escort you out. Take your check. I don't want you coming back claiming I owe you a dime. Victoria looked around the room. She saw 300 faces watching her humiliation. Some hiding smiles behind napkins, others staring with open fascination. Her social standing was crumbling in real time. Each second, another brick falling from her carefully constructed tower. With a strangled cry of rage, she snatched the check from the floor, spun on her heel, and stormed out. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind her with a sound like a cell closing. Marcus Kane didn't watch her go. He turned his attention back to Sophie, who stood frozen with the ice pack pressed against her cheek. She was trembling. Not from fear now, from shock, from the sudden, terrifying realization that she had just been the catalyst for the breakup of New York's biggest power couple. Mr. Kane, Sophie whispered, lowering the ice, I'll pack my things. I'm so sorry for the trouble. She turned to flee toward the kitchen, but his hand caught her wrist, firm but not painful. Where are you going? To leave, to quit before you fire me. Marcus frowned, actually frowned, like the idea confused him. Who said you were fired? But the trouble? You didn't cause trouble, Sophie. He released her wrist but kept his gaze locked on hers. You revealed a problem I should have seen months ago. You did me a favor. He looked at Mr. Harrington, who was sweating profusely nearby. Harrington. Yes, Mr. Kane? Sophie is done for the night. Put her on paid leave for the week to recover. Of course, sir. Absolutely, sir. Marcus turned back to Sophie. My driver is outside. I'm taking you home. Oh, no. I couldn't possibly. It wasn't a request. His tone was softer now, but still brooking no argument. I don't trust Victoria not to have someone waiting for you by the employee exit. Sophie hesitated. She looked at her scuffed work shoes, then at his polished Oxfords that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She had no money for a cab. The subway at 11 at night after humiliating a senator's daughter felt like an invitation to disaster. Okay, she whispered. They walked out of the restaurant together. The paparazzi were already swarming the entrance. Someone inside must have tipped them off the moment Victoria stormed out. Flashes popped like lightning strikes. Reporters shouted questions that blurred into noise. Marcus placed a protective hand on the small of Sophie's back, guiding her through the chaos. He shielded her face with his body, using his height and presence to create a bubble of space around her. Within seconds, they were inside a sleek black SUV with windows tinted dark enough to seal out the world. The door shut. The noise disappeared. The interior smelled of expensive leather and cedarwood. Sophie sank into a seat that felt like it cost more than her entire apartment. Where do you live? Marcus asked as the car pulled away from the curb. Astoria, 34th Street. Marcus tapped on the partition. The driver nodded. They sat in silence for several minutes. The city lights blurred past rain-streaked windows. Sophie kept stealing glances at him. This man who terrified the entire city, who had just destroyed his engagement to defend a waitress, who moved through the world like he owned it. Why did you do that? The question escaped before Sophie could stop it, her curiosity overriding her sense of self-preservation. Marcus looked out the window. I don't like bullies. Everyone is afraid of you. They say you're a monster, but you helped me. I don't like debts either. Sophie frowned. I don't owe you anything. No. Marcus turned to look at her. His eyes dropped to the compass locket at her throat again. But I might owe you. Sophie's hand flew to the locket, instinctively covering it. What do you mean? That locket, the compass. Where did you get it? Her voice came out defensive, protective. It was my father's. He died a long time ago. Your father, Marcus repeated the word slowly. James Mitchell. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She pressed herself back against the door, suddenly aware that she was trapped in a moving vehicle with a man who somehow knew things he shouldn't. How do you know that? Marcus's expression softened, the hard lines of his face rearranging into something that looked almost like sorrow. Because, Sophie, James Mitchell was the only man I ever trusted. He was my father's consigliere, and he saved my life when I was a boy. The words didn't make sense. Sophie shook her head, trying to process. You're mistaken. My father was an accountant. He died in a car accident on the I-95. My mother told me, is that what they told you? Marcus's voice was gentle now, almost kind. Did they tell you he died instantly? No pain? Sophie nodded mutely. He didn't. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. He opened it slowly, revealing a silver ring. Heavy, masculine, with a crest that matched the compass hanging around Sophie's neck exactly. He died taking 3 bullets meant for me during the turf war of 2008. He died a hero. The car felt too small suddenly, too close. Sophie couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her entire childhood was unraveling like cheap thread. That's not... My mother said, your mother was protecting you. Marcus held the ring but didn't offer it yet. James wanted you safe, so he had your mother change your names and move you away from Connecticut, away from this life. He made me promise that if I ever found his daughter, I would give her this ring and tell her the truth. Sophie stared at the ring, at the crest that matched her locket, at the proof that her entire life had been built on a necessary lie. I've been looking for James Mitchell's family for 12 years, Marcus said quietly, and tonight you spilled champagne on my fiancée. A sound escaped Sophie's throat. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sub. The absurdity of it crashed over her like a wave. The car came to a smooth halt in front of her building. The contrast was stark. His luxury SUV sitting in front of peeling paint and cracked concrete steps. Two worlds colliding. Listen to me carefully, Sophie. Marcus's voice turned serious again. Victoria is petty, but her father, Senator Richard Ashford, is dangerous. He uses the law like a weapon. By humiliating his daughter tonight, I started a war, and you are now a target. The press will paint you as the other woman to sell papers. I'm just a waitress, Sophie protested. Not anymore. Marcus pulled a card from his pocket and handed it to her. Heavy stock, embossed lettering. Kane Tower. Tomorrow morning at 8, do not go to the restaurant. A car will pick you up. You're coming to my office. Wait, because if Victoria wants a war, I'm going to need someone I can trust. His eyes held hers. And if you have your father's blood, you're smarter than you look. Sophie took the card. Her hand was shaking. I was a medical student. Before the money ran out, I'm not just a waitress. For the first time, Marcus smiled. A real smile that transformed his entire face from stone to something almost human. I know. I saw how you handled the cut on your hand when the glass broke last week. You didn't panic. You assessed, treated, moved on. You were watching me last week? I watch everything in my city, Sophie. He reached across and opened her door. Go inside, lock the door. Don't open it for anyone. I'll see you tomorrow morning. Sophie got out of the car on legs that felt unsteady. She watched the SUV pull away, its taillights disappearing into the rainy New York night. She stood on the sidewalk for a long, then she touched her cheek where Victoria had slapped her, touched the locket at her throat that suddenly meant something completely different. Her life as nobody was over. She just didn't know yet if that was salvation or damnation. Sophie woke to the sound of her phone buzzing like an angry hornet. She reached for it instinctively, still half asleep, and squinted at the screen. 53 missed calls, 72 text messages. The numbers kept climbing as she watched. She sat up too fast. Her head spun. The events of last night crashed back into her consciousness like a freight train. The slap, Marcus Kane, the compass, her father's ring sitting on her nightstand where she'd placed it before falling into exhausted sleep at 3 in the morning. Sophie opened her social media. The first thing she saw was her own face. The photo was grainy, clearly taken on someone's phone from inside the obsidian. Victoria's hand was frozen mid-slap. Sophie's head was turning from the impact. And in the background, Marcus Kane was rising from his seat with an expression that looked like the calm before an execution. The caption read, "Mafia kingpin dumps senator's daughter for mystery waitress." Below it, another headline, "The slap heard around New York." Someone had uploaded video, multiple videos from multiple angles. The footage had 17 million views and climbing. Sophie watched herself get hit, watched Marcus hand her the ice, watched him write the check and drop it at Victoria's feet like garbage. The internet was divided into camps. Half the comments called Marcus a hero. The other half called Sophie a homewrecker, gold digger, opportunist. Words that cut deeper than Victoria's palm ever could. A loud pounding on her apartment door made Sophie jump so hard she nearly dropped the phone. "Sophie Mitchell, NYPD, open up!" Her heart stopped. Actually stopped. Then restarted at double speed. She scrambled out of bed, throwing on a robe over her sleep shirt. She looked through the peephole. Two uniformed officers and a man in a cheap suit stood in the hallway. The man in the suit held up a badge. "Detective Miller, we have a warrant to search these premises." Sophie's hands shook as she opened the door. "Search for what?" "Grand larceny." Detective Miller pushed past her into the apartment. His eyes were hard, mean, the kind of eyes that belonged to someone who enjoyed this part of the job. "Miss Victoria Ashford claims you stole a diamond bracelet from her wrist during last night's altercation." "What? That's insane. I didn't steal anything. She hit me." "We'll see about that." Miller gestured to the officers. "Check the bedroom." Sophie stood in her tiny living room watching strangers tear through her life. They pulled books off shelves, dumped drawers onto the floor, went through her closet with rough hands that didn't care if they broke anything. She knew what this was, knew it in her bones. This was Senator Ashford's response. Fast, brutal, designed to destroy her before she could become a problem. "Detective?" One of the officers emerged from the bedroom holding something that caught the light. A diamond bracelet. Glittering. Expensive. Absolutely not Sophie's. Her blood turned to ice water. "I have never seen that in my life." Her voice came out steady despite the terror crawling up her spine. "That's not mine." "Save it for the judge, sweetheart." Detective Miller pulled out handcuffs. The metal gleamed under her apartment's cheap overhead light. "You're under arrest for grand larceny." He grabbed her arm, spinning her around with more force than necessary. The handcuffs clicked shone around her wrists. Cold, tight. The metal bit into her skin. "Please." Sophie heard the desperation in her own voice and hated it. "I didn't do this. Let me call someone." "You can make your call from the station." They dragged her down the stairs and onto the street. Neighbors watched from windows. Mrs. Chen from 2B, the college students who lived above her, all of them seeing Sophie Mitchell in handcuffs, all of them believing she was a criminal. The squad car smelled like old coffee and despair. Sophie sat in the back with her hands cuffed behind her, the metal digging into her wrists with every bump in the road. Through the window, she saw a black sedan following 3 cars back. The window rolled down just enough to reveal a man with a scar running down his left cheek. One of Senator Ashford's fixers. They weren't even hiding it. At the precinct, they didn't put her in a holding cell. They put her in an interrogation room. Gray walls, metal table bolted to the floor, a mirror that was obviously one-way glass. Sophie sat in the cold metal chair and tried to breathe, tried to think. Medical school had taught her to stay calm under pressure, to assess, to problem solve. But medical school hadn't prepared her for this, for the weight of government power being used as a weapon against someone with no resources to fight back. The door opened. Detective Miller entered carrying a manila folder. He sat across from her and smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Here's how this works, Buffy. Can I call you Sophie?" She didn't answer. "Senator Ashford is a forgiving man." Miller opened the folder. "He doesn't want to ruin a young girl's life. He's willing to drop all charges. Make this whole thing go away." "If?" If you sign a statement, he slid a piece of paper across the table, admitting that you provoked Miss Ashford, that you were intoxicated on the job, and that Marcus Kane coerced you into making a scene to embarrass the senator's family. Sophie read the document. Every word was a lie. Every sentence designed to destroy her reputation while giving Senator Ashford ammunition against Marcus. And if I don't sign? Miller leaned back in his chair. Then you go to Rikers for grand larceny, 5 to 10 years. And while you're locked up, we'll be taking a very close look at your mother's medical insurance. I hear there are some irregularities. Would be a real shame if Catherine Mitchell lost her coverage right when she needs it most. The threat landed like a physical blow. Sophie felt sick. They were threatening her mother, a woman dying of cancer, using her as leverage to force Sophie to lie. Her hand moved toward the pen, then the door exploded open. Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway was a woman in a navy blue pantsuit that probably cost more than Detective Miller's monthly salary. She had dark hair pulled into a severe bun and glasses that made her look like a particularly dangerous librarian. Behind her stood two men in suits who looked like they could break Miller in half without breathing hard. And behind them, looking terrified, was the police captain. "Who the hell are you?" Miller jumped to his feet. "Elena Kane." The woman adjusted her glasses with one manicured finger. "Marcus Kane's sister, and Sophie Mitchell's attorney." She walked into the room like she owned it. In 3 steps, she was at the table. She picked up the statement Sophie had almost signed, read it once, and tore it in half. "You can't do that." Miller's face went red. "I just did." Elena's voice was calm. Bored even. She turned to the police captain. "Captain Rodriguez, my client is being held without due process on charges based on planted evidence. I have security footage from the Obsidian showing Miss Ashford wearing the bracelet in question after she left the restaurant." She pulled out a tablet and set it on the table. The screen showed Victoria Ashford at some nightclub, dancing with a drink in one hand. On her wrist, clear as day, was the diamond bracelet they'd supposedly found in Sophie's apartment. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m., 2 hours after she'd left the Obsidian. Furthermore, Elena wasn't done. "I filed a formal complaint with Internal Affairs regarding Detective Miller's financial records. It seems he received a wire transfer of $25,000 this morning from a shell company linked to Senator Ashford's campaign fund." The color drained from Miller's face. Elena looked at the captain. "Uncuff her, now." "Detective Miller." The captain's voice shook. "Uncuff Miss Mitchell immediately." Miller's hands fumbled with the keys. The handcuffs came off. Sophie rubbed her wrists where the metal had left red marks. Her hands were shaking. "Come, Sophie." Elena offered her hand. Professional, efficient. "Marcus is waiting, and he's very unhappy." The ride to Kane Tower was silent. Sophie sat in the back of a limousine that smelled like leather and money. Elena sat across from her, typing on her phone with the rapid-fire precision of someone who controlled chaos for a living. "How did you know?" Sophie finally asked. "Marcus had someone monitoring police frequencies the moment you didn't answer your phone this morning." Elena didn't look up. "We knew about the raid 7 minutes after it started. The bracelet was planted, obviously. Victoria's not as clever as she thinks she is." "They threatened my mother." Elena's fingers paused on her phone. She looked up, and for the first time, Sophie saw something human in those cold, efficient eyes. "I know, and Detective Miller will be lucky if he only loses his job." The car pulled up to a building that pierced the Manhattan skyline like a black knife. Kane Tower. 70 stories of dark glass that reflected the city back at itself. They bypassed the main lobby, taking a private elevator that ascended so fast Sophie's ears popped. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of New York. The interior was all dark wood and sharp edges, art that probably belonged in museums, furniture that looked like it had been designed rather than bought. Marcus Kane stood by the fireplace with a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He'd shed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle. There was a tattoo on his right wrist, a compass, the same design as Sophie's locket. He didn't turn when they entered. "Did you get her out?" His voice was low, dangerous. "With time to spare," Elena said. She set her briefcase on a glass table. But Senator Ashford is playing dirty, Marcus. He didn't just try to frame her. He froze the construction accounts for the Hudson Project 20 minutes ago, claiming Mafia ties to the funding sources. Marcus turned. His eyes found Sophie immediately, scanning her face, her wrists, looking for damage. I'm sorry, I underestimated how quickly he would strike. He sent the police. Sophie's voice was steadier than she felt. He tried to ruin my life just because his daughter was embarrassed. He tried to ruin your life because you're associated with me now. Marcus crossed the room toward her, and in his eyes, that makes you a pawn he can crush to hurt me. He stopped in front of her, reached out and gently took her wrist, examining the red marks the handcuffs had left. His jaw tightened. The senator thinks he can squeeze me, Marcus said, still looking at her wrist. He thinks by attacking my reputation and my finances, he can force me back to Victoria. He believes I need his political cover to operate. Do you? Sophie asked. Marcus laughed. It was a dark sound, humorless. I own half the judges in this state, Sophie. I don't need his cover, but I do need to neutralize him without turning him into a martyr. If I kill him, he becomes a hero. If I expose him clumsily, he spins it. He released her wrist and looked at her fully. I need to destroy his credibility, make him look like a desperate, vindictive man attacking an innocent woman, make him look weak. Sophie frowned. How? By giving the press a better story. Marcus walked to the windows, looking down at the city spread out below like a circuit board. The press already thinks you're the mystery woman, the waitress who stole the heart of New York's most dangerous man. If we hide, you look like a mistress and I look like a scoundrel. He turned back to face her. But if we embrace it, if we show the world that I didn't leave Victoria because of a spilled drink, but because I found something real, something worth fighting for. Understanding hit Sophie like cold water. You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend. Not girlfriend. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring box. He opened it. Inside sat a diamond that made Victoria's engagement ring look like costume jewelry, a rare blue diamond surrounded by smaller white stones set in platinum. My fiancée. Sophie stared at the ring, at the impossibility of what he was suggesting. This was my mother's, Marcus said quietly. It's the only thing the senator truly fears. Legitimacy. If I marry a hardworking young woman whose father was a hero, the public will love it. We become the fairy tale, and Victoria becomes the bitter ex who tried to frame Cinderella. This is insane. Sophie's voice came out as a whisper. I can't marry a mafia boss. It's a contract. Elena stepped forward, all business again. 6 months. You live here, you attend events, you smile for the cameras. In exchange, Marcus pays off your mother's medical bills in full, pays off your student loans, and sets up a trust fund that ensures you never have to carry a tray again. Sophie looked between them. Marcus with his calm, calculating expression. Elena with her efficiency and her tablet full of contracts. And she thought about her mother in that hospital bed, about the medical bills stacking up like a death sentence, about Detective Miller threatening to take away Catherine Mitchell's insurance, about being powerless while powerful people use the law as a weapon. What happens to the senator? Sophie asked. Marcus's expression turned predatory. While the world is watching our romance, Elena and I will be dismantling his empire brick by brick. By the time our wedding date arrives, Senator Ashford will be lucky if he can get a job as a mall Santa. Sophie reached out and took the ring from the box. It was heavy, cold, real. One condition, she said, lifting her chin to meet Marcus's eyes. I'm not just a prop. If we do this, you treat me with respect. And you tell me the truth about my father, everything. For the first time since she'd met him, Marcus Kane smiled like he meant it. Deal. He took the ring from her fingers and slid it onto her hand. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting 20 years for her. Welcome to the family, Sophie. The next 4 days were a controlled hurricane. Marcus didn't do anything by halves. Sophie found herself in the hands of a team that transformed her from waitress to potential missus. Kane with surgical precision. A stylist named Marcus taught her how to walk in 6-inch heels without wincing. An etiquette coach named Margaret drilled her on which fork to use for escargot, how to hold a champagne flute, how to smile at people she wanted to murder. But the real education happened in the evenings. Marcus kept his word. Every night after the stylist left and the coaches went home, he would find Sophie in his study. He'd pour 2 glasses of whiskey, settle into the leather chair across from her, and tell her about James Mitchell. Your father wasn't just a bodyguard, Marcus said on the second night. Rain drummed against the windows while Manhattan glittered below. He was the moral center of the Kane Syndicate. My father, Vincent Kane, was brilliant but ruthless. He would have crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. James was the one who stopped him. Sophie listened, hungry for these pieces of a man she'd never really known. He taught me chess. Marcus gestured to the board set up between them. Ivory and ebony pieces arranged for battle. Said every move in this world is like chess. You think 3 steps ahead. You protect your king. You sacrifice pawns when necessary. But you never ever forget that every piece has value. Even pawns? Especially pawns. Because a pawn that reaches the other side of the board becomes a queen. They played. Sophie lost the first game in 15 moves, but she learned. By the third night, she lasted 30 moves. By the fourth, she almost had him. You're dangerous, Marcus said, studying the board with something like respect. Your father would be proud. On the fifth night, he took her to a private shooting range beneath Kane Tower. You should know how to use this. He handed her a Glock 19, compact, deadly. I hope you never need it, but hope isn't a strategy. Sophie held the gun like it might bite her. I don't want to shoot anyone. Neither do I. That's what makes us different from people like the senator. Marcus moved behind her, adjusting her stance. His hands on her waist were warm through her shirt. Professional. Mostly professional. Feet shoulder-width apart, firm grip but not strangling it. Breathe out as you squeeze the trigger. Sophie fired. The gun kicked in her hands. The target 50 feet away sprouted a hole 3 inches left of center. Again, she fired until her hands stopped shaking, until the holes clustered near the target's heart. Her surgeon's hands were steady, precise, made for this in a way that should have terrified her, but somehow didn't. Remind me not to make you angry, Marcus said from behind her. His voice held a note of something that might have been pride, or might have been something else entirely. Sophie lowered the gun and turned. He was close, closer than necessary in the enclosed space of the shooting booth. She could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, could smell sandalwood and gunpowder. Marcus, she started to say. He stepped back. The gala is tomorrow night. Are you ready? The moment broke. Sophie nodded, not trusting her voice. Good, because Senator Ashford will be there, and he's going to try to destroy you in front of everyone who matters. The Metropolitan Charity Gala was exactly the kind of event Sophie had only seen in movies. The ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers the size of cars, ice sculptures that looked like frozen angels, a string quartet playing Vivaldi, while 500 of New York's elite mingled in designer gowns and custom tuxedos. Sophie stood in front of the full-length mirror in Marcus's penthouse and barely recognized herself. The gown was midnight blue velvet that hugged her body like it had been painted on. Strapless, elegant, with a train that pooled on the floor like liquid night. The diamond necklace at her throat was worth more than the Obsidian restaurant. Her hair was swept up in an intricate arrangement that had taken 2 hours to create. She looked like someone who belonged in Marcus Kane's world. The lie was getting easier to believe. You look terrified, Elena said from the doorway. She wore a sleek black gown and held a glass of champagne. That's good. Use it. Terrified looks vulnerable. Vulnerable plays well. I am vulnerable, Sophie said. No. Elena walked over and adjusted Sophie's necklace with expert fingers. You're a woman whose mother is dying and who got hit by a spoiled brat. The public loves you. Own it. The door opened. Marcus entered wearing a tuxedo that should have been illegal. He looked like every dangerous fantasy Sophie had never let herself have. He stopped when he saw her. Just stopped and stared. You look worthy of a queen, he finally said. Sophie's breath caught. You said that before. I meant it then too. He offered his arm. Are you ready for war, Sophie? She took his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath the expensive fabric. As ready as I'll ever be. The arrival was orchestrated chaos. The limousine pulled up to the red carpet. Paparazzi swarmed like locusts. Flashbulbs created a strobe effect that would have been disorienting if Marcus's hand hadn't been firm on her waist, guiding her forward. Questions flew from every direction. Marcus, is it true? Sophie, how did you meet? What about Victoria? Marcus ignored them all. He walked Sophie up the red carpet like they had all the time in the world, letting every camera capture her face, the ring, the way he looked at her like she was the only person who mattered. Inside, the ballroom fell silent when they entered. Not the music. The quartet kept playing. But the conversations died like someone had flipped a switch. 500 faces turned. 500 pairs of eyes assessed, judged, calculated. At the far end of the room, near a champagne tower that looked structurally unsound, stood Senator Richard Ashford and his daughter. Victoria looked worse than Sophie had ever seen her, haggard beneath heavy makeup. Her eyes were red-rimmed despite expensive concealer. She wore a gold dress that was trying too hard. Desperate, flashy. When she saw Sophie, her champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound echoed through the silent ballroom. A perfect mirror of the bottle Sophie had dropped 5 nights ago. Head high, Marcus murmured in her ear. Smile. You own this room. They moved through the crowd. People who would have never noticed Sophie when she was carrying trays now practically bowed as she passed. Senators, CEOs, old money and new power, all suddenly desperate to be introduced to the future Mrs. Kane. But they had to pass the senator. It was unavoidable. The main event in this theater they were performing. Senator Richard Ashford was a large man with a face like uncooked beef and eyes that belonged on something that lived in deep water. He stepped into their path with the confidence of someone who'd spent 30 years making people bend to his will. Marcus, his voice boomed across the ballroom, loud enough for everyone to hear. And the waitress. I see you clean up well, Miss Mitchell. Her name is Sophie, Marcus said. His voice was ice. And yes, she does. Unlike some people, she doesn't need a title to have class. Victoria pushed forward, trembling with barely controlled rage. This is a joke. You can't just bring her here. In front of me, she's a gold digger. Everyone knows it. Sophie felt the old instinct to look down, to make herself small, to apologize for existing. But she wasn't that person anymore. She met Victoria's eyes steadily. Victoria, I understand breakups are hard, but please don't embarrass yourself further. The whole bracelet situation was shameful enough. Gasps rippled through the nearby crowd. Sophie had just publicly referenced the failed frame job, the one that the press was already calling suspicious. Senator Ashford's face went from beef to eggplant. Watch your tongue, girl. You're playing a very dangerous game. You think Kane can protect you? He's a criminal, and criminals always fall. Actually, Senator, Elena appeared beside them like a particularly well-dressed shark. We're currently reviewing the legality of your offshore holdings in Panama. It seems criminals come in all shapes and sizes. Some even wear Senate pins. The senator went pale. Actually pale. For just a moment, Sophie saw past the bluster and the power to the frightened man underneath. You wouldn't dare, he whispered. Marcus leaned in close. His voice dropped to barely a murmur, but in the sudden silence, it carried. Touch her again. Touch her family. And I release everything. Your accounts, your mistresses, the photos from the Cayman Islands, all of it. He pulled back and smiled, pleasant, casual. Enjoy the party, Senator. Marcus swept Sophie away toward the dance floor. Behind them, the senator stood frozen, the foundation of his power cracking beneath his feet. The waltz started. Marcus pulled Sophie into his arms, and they began to move. She'd practiced this. Margaret, the etiquette coach, had drilled her on the steps until Sophie could do them in her sleep. But dancing with Marcus in his study was different from dancing with him here, in front of everyone, with his hand warm on her back and their bodies moving together like they'd done this 1,000 times. We did it, Sophie whispered. He's cornered. A cornered rat bites hardest, Marcus said. His eyes scanned the room over her shoulder. This isn't over. I know. Sophie looked up at him, really looked at him. This man who had upended his entire life to protect someone he barely knew. Why are you really doing this, Marcus? His eyes came back to her face. For a moment, the mask slipped. She saw something underneath, something that looked almost like fear. Because I owe your father a debt I can never repay, he said quietly, and because you remind me that there are still things worth protecting in this world. The music swelled. They turned together, the ballroom spinning around them in a blur of crystal and silk. Marcus, Sophie started to say. His phone vibrated. He pulled it out smoothly, glanced at the screen, and his entire expression changed. Went cold. Dangerous. What? Sophie asked. Nothing. He pocketed the phone. Just business. But Sophie had seen his face. Something was wrong. She just didn't know yet that the senator had already made his move, and that in 48 hours, Sophie Mitchell would be fighting for her life in an abandoned warehouse while Marcus Kane burned half of New York trying to find her. The music played on. The champagne flowed. And somewhere in the city, men were preparing a windowless van. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Part 3, The Surrender, 7,500, 3 words. 2 days passed like a held breath. The media couldn't get enough of them. Every news outlet ran the story. Mafia king chooses love over power. Waitress becomes princess. The photographs from the gala were everywhere. Sophie in her midnight blue gown, looking up at Marcus like he hung the moon. Marcus with his hand protective on her waist, his expression softer than anyone had ever seen it. The public ate it up. Team Sophie became a trending hashtag. Women across the country saw themselves in her story. The underdog who got hit and refused to stay down. The working class girl who caught the eye of the most powerful man in New York. It was perfect. Almost too perfect. Sophie should have known that perfect things don't last. She woke on the third morning after the gala to sunlight streaming through the floor to ceiling windows of her guest room in Kane Tower. The bed was obscenely comfortable. Egyptian cotton sheets that probably cost more than her old monthly rent. She stretched, feeling muscles she didn't know she had from all the dancing lessons and etiquette training. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. Saw you on the news again, sweetheart. You looked beautiful. Are you happy? Sophie stared at the question. Was she happy? She was living in a penthouse. Her mother's medical bills were paid. Her student loans had vanished overnight. She wore clothes that cost more than cars and ate food she couldn't pronounce. But every night Marcus retreated to his study. Every morning he was already gone before she woke. They played their parts perfectly in public. In private, there was a distance growing that Sophie didn't know how to bridge. She typed back, I'm safe, Mom, that's enough. Another lie. When had she become so good at lying? Sophie got dressed in jeans and a cashmere sweater that Elena had insisted she needed. She found Marcus in the kitchen, which was a rarity. He stood at the counter with a cup of coffee, reading something on his tablet. He'd already been to the gym. His hair was still damp from the shower. Good morning, Sophie said. Marcus looked up. For just a second, something warm flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the polite distance he'd been maintaining. Morning, there's coffee. I was thinking of visiting my mother today. Sophie poured herself a cup. The care facility upstate. I haven't seen her in person since all this started. Marcus frowned. Take the driver and security. Marcus, that's excessive. The senator is backing off. The press loves us. I'll be fine. The senator is quiet. That's different from backing off. He set down his tablet. Quiet men are planning something. I can't live in a cage. Sophie met his eyes. I need some piece of my old life, some normal. She watched him struggle with it, the urge to protect versus the knowledge that she was right. Finally, he nodded. The driver stays with you. Non-negotiable. Deal. She didn't know that Marcus's instincts were right, that Senator Richard Ashford had indeed been quiet because he was planning, that while the world watched their fairy tale romance, the senator had been making phone calls to people who didn't appear in any official records, that he'd found his daughter, Victoria, in a dark place. Not just angry, broken. And that broken things, when weaponized, become the most dangerous things of all. Sophie left Kane Tower at 10 in the morning. The driver, a silent man named Thomas, who had worked for Marcus for 12 years, held the door of the town car open for her. The November air was crisp. New York was beautiful in that brief window between fall and winter, when the city seemed to hold its breath. The drive upstate would take 90 minutes. Sophie settled into the leather seat and watched Manhattan disappear behind them. She didn't notice the delivery truck that pulled into traffic 3 cars back. Didn't see the way it matched their speed exactly. Didn't know that the license plates were stolen. They were 40 minutes outside the city when it happened. The delivery truck accelerated. Thomas saw it in the rearview mirror. His hand moved toward the phone mounted on the dashboard, reaching to call Kane Tower. He never made it. The truck slammed into the side of the town car with the force of a small bomb. Metal shrieked, glass exploded into 1,000 glittering pieces. The world became a violent carnival ride. Sophie's head cracked against something hard. Stars burst behind her eyes. Then darkness. When Sophie came to, hands were dragging her from the wreckage. Rough hands that didn't care if they hurt her. Her head throbbed. She tasted blood. Tried to focus her vision, but everything swam. Get her in the van. Move, move, move. A hood came down over her head. Thick fabric that smelled like oil and fear. Zip ties bit into her wrists, cutting off circulation. She was thrown into something, a hard metal floor. A door slammed. An engine roared to life. The animal part of Sophie's brain screamed at her to panic, to fight, to scream until someone helped her. But medical school had taught her something valuable. Panic killed patients. Clear thinking saved them. She forced herself to breathe, to think, to assess. Injuries, possible concussion, abraded wrists, bruised ribs, nothing immediately life-threatening. Situation: kidnapped, location unknown, captors unknown but professional. Assets: consciousness, medical knowledge, the fact that someone would notice she was missing. Marcus would notice. Sophie clung to that thought like a lifeline as the van drove for what felt like hours, but was probably only one. She counted turns, listened to the change in road surface from smooth highway to rough secondary roads. Felt when they left pavement entirely for gravel. Finally, the van stopped. The back doors opened. Cold air rushed in. She was hauled out and dragged across uneven ground, into a building that echoed, large, empty, an abandoned warehouse maybe, or a factory. The hood was ripped off. Sophie blinked against sudden light. Afternoon sun streamed through broken windows high above. She was in a warehouse, loading docks on one side, rusted machinery scattered around like the bones of dead giants. And standing in front of her, flanked by 2 men with guns, was someone Sophie hadn't expected. Victoria Ashford, but not the Victoria from the restaurant or even the gala. This Victoria looked like she'd aged 10 years in a week. Her platinum hair was unwashed and pulled into a messy ponytail. No makeup covered the dark circles under her eyes. She wore jeans and a sweater instead of designer gowns. And in her shaking hand, she held a pistol that looked too big for her. "Victoria," Sophie said carefully, "put the gun down." "Shut up." Victoria's voice cracked. "Just shut up." Sophie took in the scene with the clinical detachment her surgical training had given her. Victoria's pupils were dilated, hands trembling, breathing erratic. She was on something, pills probably, and she was terrified, which made her exponentially more dangerous than any professional criminal. "You took everything." Victoria's voice rose to a scream that echoed off the concrete walls. "My fiancée, my reputation, my father's entire legacy. Because of you, the FBI is at our house right now, going through my father's files, arresting his staff. It's over. Everything is over." "I didn't do that," Sophie said, keeping her voice steady. "Your father did that himself." "Liar!" Victoria fired a shot. The bullet hit the concrete somewhere to Sophie's left. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Sophie's ears rang, but she didn't flinch. Couldn't afford to. If she showed fear, Victoria would feed on it. "My father dedicated his life to this city." Victoria was crying now. Mascara tracked down her unwashed face. "He fought against men like Kane, against organized crime. He was a hero." "Your father was a hypocrite," Sophie said quietly, "using offshore accounts while cutting hospital funding, taking bribes while prosecuting others for the same thing. He became what he claimed to hate. Because of Kane. Because the system was rigged against him. Because—" Victoria's words dissolved into sobs. The gun wavered. Sophie saw her chance. Victoria, this isn't you. You're not a killer. You're hurt and angry and your father is using you. Don't let him make you into something you're not. You don't know anything about me. Victoria's voice dropped to something small, broken. You don't know what it's like. My mother died when I was 12. Cancer. Dad blamed me. Said I was why he couldn't focus on his work. Said if I'd been less needy, maybe he could have saved her. Something in Sophie's chest twisted. Understanding bloomed, unwanted. Victoria wasn't evil. She was damaged. A girl who'd spent her entire life trying to earn love from a father who had none to give. I was supposed to marry Marcus, Victoria continued. Dad arranged it. Said it was my chance to be useful, to matter. Finally, I would be someone's choice. But he didn't choose you, Sophie said gently. And that's not your fault, Victoria. You can't force someone to love you. He would have, eventually. We were good together. We looked right. And then you... Victoria's face contorted. A nobody. A waitress with nothing. You stole it with one night, one dress, one slap. I didn't steal anything. It was never real between you and Marcus. You know that. I could have made it real. Victoria raised the gun again, this time pointing it directly at Sophie's chest. I could have been enough, but now it doesn't matter. Dad's going to prison. I'm going to prison. At least I can make Marcus hurt the way I'm hurting. She stepped closer. The gun was 3 feet from Sophie's heart. At this range, even Victoria's shaking hands couldn't miss. Sophie's mind raced. Medical knowledge, anatomy. If she dove left, the bullet might miss vital organs, might hit her shoulder instead of her heart. But zip-tied hands made diving impossible. She was out of options. Do it then, Sophie said, meeting Victoria's eyes. Pull the trigger, but it won't change anything. Your father will still go to prison. Marcus still won't love you. And you'll spend the rest of your life knowing you murdered an unarmed woman to make yourself feel better. Victoria's finger moved to the trigger. If it's over, a voice said from the shadows, then why dig the hole deeper? Everything stopped. Victoria spun around, the gun swinging wildly. Sophie's head whipped toward the voice. Marcus Kane stepped out of the darkness near the loading dock entrance. He was alone. No security, no weapons visible. Just a man in a black coat walking toward armed kidnappers like he was taking a stroll through Central Park. Marcus, Victoria's voice broke on his name. Stay back. I'll kill her. I swear to God I'll kill her. No, you won't. Marcus kept walking, slow, steady, every step deliberate. Because you're not a killer, Victoria. You're a woman who's been hurt, manipulated by a father who never deserved you. You don't know anything about me. I know you spent 3 years planning our wedding even though I never asked. I know you cried yourself to sleep the night I gave you that ring because you knew I didn't love you. I know your father calls you stupid when you disappoint him. I know he sent you here to take a hostage because he's too much of a coward to face what he's done. Victoria trembled. The gun dropped slightly. He said you'd listen. He said you loved me once, that I could fix this. I never loved you. Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. And I'm sorry for that. You deserve better than a marriage of convenience. But this? He gestured around the warehouse. This isn't fixing anything. This is letting him destroy you the way he's destroyed everything else. Stop walking, Victoria shrieked. She swung the gun back toward Sophie. Stop or I'll... The gunshot cracked through the warehouse. Sophie's eyes squeezed shut, waiting for the pain, waiting for her body to realize it had been shot. But the pain didn't come. She opened her eyes. Victoria was on her knees. Blood spread across her shoulder, staining her sweater, dark red. The gun had fallen from her hand and lay 3 feet away. She was screaming. Not words, just raw sound. Sophie looked up. Red laser dots danced across the warehouse, coming from the catwalks above, from behind rusted machinery, from positions that had been occupied long before Victoria had ever brought Sophie here. Marcus's snipers, they'd been there the entire time, watching, waiting, following orders that probably went something like this. If she points the gun at Sophie's head, end her. Otherwise, wound and wait. The two thugs Victoria had brought dropped their weapons and raised their hands. They knew when they were outmatched. Marcus closed the distance in seconds, but he didn't go to Victoria, didn't check on his snipers. He fell to his knees in front of Sophie, his hands frantically checking her for injuries. Sophie. Her name came out like a prayer, like a curse, like the only word that mattered. Did they hurt you? Did they touch you? I'm okay. Sophie's voice was surprisingly steady. Concussion maybe? Bruising ribs? Nothing serious. Marcus pulled a knife from his boot and cut the zip ties. Blood rushed back into Sophie's hands in a painful, tingling flood. The moment she was free, Marcus pulled her into his chest. He was shaking. Marcus Kane, the man who terrified an entire city, was trembling like a leaf in a storm. His arms wrapped around her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her neck. I thought I lost you, he whispered against her skin. When I got the call, when they told me the car was hit, I thought. His voice broke, actually broke. This man made of stone and danger and calculated violence was crying. Sophie felt wetness against her neck. I knew you'd come, she said softly. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him just as tightly. I counted on it. Marcus pulled back just enough to frame her face with his hands. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. His eyes, usually so controlled, were wild with emotion. Then he kissed her. Not gentle, not careful, desperate and consuming and full of everything he'd been holding back for weeks. Sophie kissed him back with equal desperation. Her hands fisted in his coat. The warehouse and the snipers and Victoria's sobbing all disappeared. There was only this, only him, only the terrifying, exhilarating truth that this had stopped being fake somewhere along the way. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. We need to go, he said. But he didn't move, couldn't seem to let go of her. Men in tactical gear were already moving through the warehouse, securing the Victoria and the two thugs. Someone was calling for paramedics, the efficient machine of Marcus's organization clicking into action. Marcus stood, pulling Sophie up with him. Then he did something that surprised her. He scooped her up into his arms, bridal style, like she weighed nothing. I can walk, Sophie protested weakly. I know. Marcus started toward the exit. Let me carry you anyway. Outside, a fleet of black SUVs waited. The sun was setting, painting the industrial wasteland in shades of gold and red. Marcus carried Sophie to the lead vehicle and settled her gently in the back seat. He slid in beside her, and the moment the door closed, he pulled her against his side. She let him, let herself be held by this complicated, dangerous man who just burned half of New York finding her. How did you know where I was? Sophie asked. I had a tracker placed inside the locket's clasp. Marcus's voice was quiet. Guilty. The day after you agreed to wear my ring. When you weren't looking, I had my jeweler reinforce the chain and embed a GPS chip. I'm sorry, I know it was a violation of your privacy, but I needed to know you were safe. Sophie touched the compass at her throat. The tracker had been there this whole time. She should have been angry, should have felt violated. Instead, she just felt grateful. Thank you, she said. Marcus looked at her like she'd lost her mind. For tracking you without permission? For caring enough to be paranoid. The corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. He pulled her closer and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Let's go home. The fallout was spectacular. The footage leaked within hours. Someone always had a camera phone. Someone always wanted to sell the story. By morning, the internet had exploded with shaky video of Victoria Ashford, disheveled and hysterical, being let out of the warehouse in handcuffs. The photos were damning. Victoria in an orange jumpsuit, her perfect life reduced to a mugshot. Eyes swollen from crying, no makeup to hide behind. Just a broken woman who'd made catastrophically bad choices. But the real story was her father. Senator Richard Ashford had spent 30 years building an empire of influence. It took Elena Kane 72 hours to tear it down completely. The documents she'd been gathering for weeks finally went to the FBI, not in a leak, not in a dump, carefully, strategically, each piece of evidence delivered with the precision of a surgeon making cuts. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, campaign finance violations, bribery, money laundering. Every crime the senator had prosecuted others for, he'd committed himself. The hypocrisy was staggering. Sophie watched it unfold from the safety of Kane Tower. The news played on a loop. Senator Ashford being let out of his Georgetown townhouse in handcuffs, looking 20 years older than he had at the gala, the Titan reduced to a frightened old man. The DA is seeking maximum sentencing, Elena reported. She stood in the penthouse living room with her ever-present tablet. 30 to 40 years. He'll die in prison. And Victoria? Sophie asked. Plea deal, 5 years for kidnapping and assault with mitigating circumstances. Her attorney successfully argued diminished capacity and psychological coercion by her father. With time served awaiting trial, she could be out in 2. Elena looked at Sophie. How do you feel about that? Sophie thought about Victoria in that warehouse. About a girl who'd spent her life trying to earn love that would never come. About how easily circumstances could twist someone into something unrecognizable. I feel sad, Sophie said honestly, for everyone. Marcus entered the room. He'd been on phone calls all morning. Damage control, business that couldn't wait even during crises. He looked exhausted. It's done, he said. The senator took a plea. 40 years, federal prison. He'll be lucky to survive 5. Sophie should have felt victorious, should have felt vindicated. Instead, she just felt hollow. The threat was gone. Her mother was safe. She was safe. Everything they'd been fighting for had been achieved. So why did it feel like losing? Over the next month, a strange quiet settled over Kane Tower. The media moved on to other scandals. The public's short attention span found new heroes and villains. Life returned to something resembling normal. Except nothing was normal. Marcus had saved her. Held her in that warehouse like she was the only thing keeping him alive. Kissed her like the world was ending. Then he'd built walls higher than anything Sophie had ever seen. He was polite, courteous, made sure she had everything she needed. But emotionally, he'd gone somewhere Sophie couldn't follow. Separate bedrooms, formal dinners where they discussed the weather. No more chess games, no more late-night conversations. He was treating her like an honored guest. And Sophie was starting to understand that sometimes the cruelest thing you could do to someone wasn't pushing them away. It was pulling them close enough to see what could be, then making sure it never happened. 6 months. That's what the contract said. The 6 months were almost up. Sophie woke on a Monday morning to find Elena already in the penthouse. She sat at the dining table with papers spread out in front of her, official-looking documents with legal letterhead. Good morning, Elena said, professional as ever. I hope I'm not intruding. It's fine. Sophie poured coffee with hands that wanted to shake. She knew what those papers were, had been dreading this day even as part of her welcomed it. Those are the dissolution papers. Yes, Elena's voice was gentler than usual. The engagement was always meant to be temporary. The terms are generous. You keep the trust fund, the house upstate for your mother. All medical bills remain paid. Clean break. Clean break, like they could just sever this thing between them with paperwork and signatures. Where is Marcus? Sophie asked. The balcony. He wanted to give you space. Of course he did. Always giving her space. Always pushing her away for her own good. Sophie set down her coffee cup. I don't need space. She walked to the glass doors that led to the terrace, took a breath, opened them. The November wind hit her immediately, cold enough to make her eyes water. Marcus stood at the railing, looking out over his city. His knuckles were white where he gripped the metal. He didn't turn when she approached. Elena's efficient, he said. The terms are generous. You should sign them. Is that an order? Sophie asked. She moved to stand beside him. The city spread out below them like a promise, like a threat. Marcus finally looked at her. His eyes were dark pools of torment. It's a plea. A plea. I promised you freedom, Sophie. His voice was rough, raw. I dragged you into kidnappings and federal investigations, into a world where people like Victoria see you as a target. I almost got you killed. But you didn't. This time, the words came out harsh, sharp. I saved you this time, but look at me, Sophie. Really look at me. I am the man who destroyed a senator's life in 4 weeks, who has enemies I haven't even told you about. Darkness follows me. If you stay, eventually it will consume you too. He reached toward her face. His hand hovered near her cheek, the same cheek Victoria had slapped all those weeks ago. Then he let it drop. You have a chance to turn a walk away, Marcus continued. Go back to medical school. Meet someone normal. A doctor or a lawyer or literally anyone who doesn't have a body count. Have a safe family, a quiet life. That's what your father would have wanted. Something inside Sophie snapped. Don't you dare. Her voice came out low, dangerous. Don't you dare speak for my father. Marcus blinked, surprised by her vehemence. You told me he was a hero because he stayed, Sophie continued, her voice rising now, months of frustration and confusion pouring out. Because he stood by your family even when it was dangerous, even when it cost him everything. And now you're trying to push me away for the exact same reason? He died, Sophie. Marcus's composure cracked. He roared the words, pain bleeding through. Your father died protecting me. Took 3 bullets that had my name on them. I held him while he bled out. I won't let his daughter suffer the same fate. That's not your choice to make, Sophie was yelling now too, tears streaming down her face. You think I want safe? You think I want some boring doctor who'll bore me to death over dinner conversation? I tried normal life, Marcus. It was cold and empty and lonely. She pulled the compass locket from under her sweater, held it up between them. I have a compass, and it points to you. It's always pointed to you. Marcus stared at the locket, at her. Something in his expression was breaking. The walls he'd built so carefully starting to crumble. I tried, he said. His voice was barely a whisper now. I tried so hard to let you go. Then stop trying. Sophie stepped closer, close enough to feel his warmth, to see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. Stop trying and start asking. Marcus closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the torment was still there. But beneath it was something else, something that looked like surrender, like hope. He reached into his pocket. Sophie expected to see the blue diamond, the prop ring they had been using for the cameras, the symbol of their fake engagement. Instead, he pulled out a small velvet box she'd never seen before. Inside was a simple platinum band, brushed metal, no diamonds, no ostentation. Just a tiny compass rose engraved into the surface. I had this made, Marcus said, his voice thick, the day after the warehouse. The other ring was for the show, for the press and the senator and everyone watching. This one is for us. He dropped to one knee on the cold terrace stone. Sophie's breath caught. This wasn't part of the plan, wasn't part of the contract. This was real. Sophie Mitchell. Marcus looked up at her with eyes that held nothing back. Every wall down, every defense gone. I love you. I think I've loved you since you spilled champagne on Victoria's dress. Maybe even before that. Maybe I was searching for you for 12 years without knowing it. His voice cracked, but he pushed through. I know I'm not safe. I know loving me is dangerous. I know I have more enemies than friends, and that darkness does follow me. But you make me want to be better. To deserve the way you look at me. To live up to the man your father thought I could be. He held up the ring. Will you marry me? Not for 6 months, not for a contract, not for the press or the public or anyone else. Just for us. Forever. Knowing the danger, knowing the crowd, will you be my true north? Snow started to fall, the first snow of the season drifting down around them like a blessing. Sophie looked at this man, this complicated, dangerous, broken man who'd saved her in every way that mattered, who'd given her back her father's memory, who'd shown her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but acting despite it. Yes, the word came out as a whisper, then louder. Yes, forever. Marcus slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her. He stood, and Sophie launched herself into his arms. He caught her, lifting her off her feet, kissing her with a desperation that felt like drowning and breathing at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both crying and laughing, the snow was falling harder, covering the city in white, making everything clean. What now? Sophie asked. She twisted the platinum band on her finger. So different from the blue diamond. So much more real. Marcus smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his entire face. Now we plan a real wedding. Now I court you properly, take you to dinner, buy you flowers. All the things I should have done from the beginning. I don't need flowers. I know, but I'm going to give them to you anyway. He pulled her close again, wrapping his coat around both of them. And then we're going to build something erschwinding together. An empire that's not built on fear but on this, on choosing each other every day. That sounds perfect. They stood on the balcony as the snow fell, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible way and decided to make it the best possible thing. 6 months later, Sophie stood in the vestibule of St. Patrick's Cathedral, wearing a dress that made her feel like she was floating. Simple, elegant, not the over-the-top gown Victoria would have chosen, just white silk that flowed like water and a short veil that framed her face. Her mother stood beside her. Catherine Mitchell looked healthy, strong. The cancer was in remission. The color had returned to her face. She wore a pale blue dress and tears were already streaming down her cheeks. Your father would be so proud, Catherine said, not because you're marrying a powerful man, but because you chose courage. She handed Sophie a small envelope. He wrote this before he died. Made me promise to give it to you on your wedding day. Sophie's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single page in her father's handwriting. She'd been so young when he died that she'd forgotten what his writing looked like. My Sophie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But don't grieve too long. I chose this life because some things are worth dying for. Loyalty, honor, protecting those we love. If you find someone worth those same sacrifices, don't run from it. The world will tell you to choose safety, to choose comfort, to protect yourself. Choose love instead. Choose courage. The compass I gave you points true north. Trust it. It will never lead you wrong. Your father who loves you, James. Sophie folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her bouquet. Her father had given his blessing across the years, from beyond the grave. The music started, Wagner's bridal chorus. The doors opened. The cathedral was packed. Not with politicians or Mafia lieutenants or society page regulars, with people. Marcus's chosen family, Elena in the front row, the staff from Kane Tower who'd become Sophie's friends, Catherine's neighbors from the cottage upstate, the doctors and nurses who treated her mother. And at the end of the aisle, waiting in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, was Marcus Kane. He looked terrified, actually terrified. This man who faced down senators and rival families in federal investigations without blinking was white-knuckling his composure watching Sophie walk toward him. When she reached him, he took her hands. They were shaking. Hi, Sophie whispered. Hi. Marcus smiled. You're beautiful. The ceremony was traditional, readings and hymns and the weight of centuries of faith pressing down on them. But when it came time for vows, Marcus had insisted on adding something. These are the vows for everyone else, he said to the priest. We'll do private ones later. So Sophie said, I do to honor and cherish. Marcus said, I do to love and protect. They exchanged the platinum compass rings. Matching. Simple. Perfect. The priest pronounced them husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Marcus pulled Sophie close and kissed her in front of God and 300 witnesses. A promise, a claim, a beginning. They walked back down the aisle together to applause and crying and joy. Mr. and Mrs. Kane. The reception was at Kane Tower, the same ballroom where they'd confronted the senator, but transformed now into something magical. Lights and flowers and music. Sophie's first dance with Marcus was to a song she'd chosen. Not a waltz, not something traditional, just a simple love song about finding home. Are you happy? Marcus murmured as they swayed. Terrified, Sophie admitted. But yes, you? More than I have any right to be. Later, after the cake was cut and the toasts were made and the guests had started to drift away, Marcus pulled Sophie aside. They slipped into the private chapel attached to the tower, a small room with stained glass and wooden pews, empty except for them. The public vows were for them, Marcus said. These are for you. He took her hands. I vow to never let the darkness touch you if I can help it, to honor your father's sacrifice by protecting you with everything I have, to be worthy of the compass you gave me, to always find my way back to true north, to you. Sophie's turn. She squeezed his hands. I vow to stand beside you in the darkness, to be your conscience when the world demands ruthlessness, to prove that love isn't weakness but the strongest weapon we have, to choose you every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. They stood forehead to forehead in the empty chapel. No cameras, no witnesses, just two people making promises they intended to keep. 1 year later, Sophie Mitchell Kane sat in the upstate cottage with her mother. Summer sunshine poured through the windows. The garden Catherine had planted was in full bloom, roses and lavender and wildflowers creating a riot of color. Sophie's hand rested on her stomach.